some traditional teachers, they say that just see that they oversimplify things, and they say that just see that you are not that fake news, and that's it, you are enlightened. But for me, I don't think it's as simple as that. Although it is actually as simple as that, just to see that you're that.
It's very simple, but it's the one thing in the sense that can't be done. The organism, or the non-existence of a something, cannot see its non-existence. It cannot see its own absence. It's not designed for that. The tools that are being used, the five senses and the mind, are designed, are born out of knowledge in a way. And knowledge has massive utility for survival. But all knowledge comes out of the comparison between, knowledge is never of a something, because there is no something. It's always a comparison between two edges, and the apparent gap between two edges. So all knowledge comes out of an apparent gap between two things. So in the Christian story of eating the apple of knowledge in the Garden of Eden was the downfall. The paradoxical shadow, you could say, of knowledge is the prediction that there must be a center to these edges, that there must be a something which is a tree, which is an apple, which is a me. And yet a separate something, whether an apple, a tree, a me, a you, time, space, has never been known, has never been seen, has never been measured. All that's ever been known, seen, measured, memoried is a comparison between two or more things, in that apparent gap between two or more somethings. So the drunkenness comes from the crazy simplicity that there is no something to be one or two. That, in a sense, there is no ignorance, there's just the illusion of knowledge. Which has that sense, that prediction that there must be a something. Whereas a something has never been known. Do you know anything?
Not anymore.
Does freedom need to know anything as an other? Does freedom need knowledge in the way we normally use that term, as a comparison between two things? Does freedom have a gap that there can be two things?
I don't think it's answerable, because it's yes and no, and that's difficult for the mind to.
Oh, it's totally unacceptable to the mind. Because the mind, again, what we call the mind, is that edge protocol. It's designed to make comparisons. It's designed to know. I often call it like a spade. A spade is great if you're on on the soil, on the earth. You can dig foundations and build any sort of structure that you want. But in this ocean, you take a spade to the ocean and try to dig a hole in the ocean, and you have a slight problem. You will very quickly get exhausted and get nowhere. So the tool, in a sense, that's being used, the questions and the responses, are not needed, are inappropriate tools, really. They're not needed. The question is its own answer.
It's very tense to be in that dualistic me, because it's always trying to box things into.
Well, you could say that the me is born, I'm using this word now drunkenly and in a neutral way, is born out of violence in a way. The violence that there are two things is born out of an energetic lie. A prediction like Alice in Wonderland, that there is something behind the curtain. So there is a violence inherent in all movement. Creation, again, creation and destruction have no gap. They're not two. So every movement will be creative and destructive simultaneously. And you could say, if you want to increase the creation, you'll also increase the destruction, because there's no gap. They are not two. So the movement based on fake news and consumerism to replicate a something is inherently violent. And again, have you observed the world, both outwardly and inwardly, how violent it is? It only moves as a sort of violence, because it moves out of it can't maintain itself, as it were, unless it's violent. It's just a question of degree of how violent it is. It's just we have become more sophisticated and have more sophisticated tools. So our violence was sort of limited by the tools we had at our disposal. And now our violence is a lot more capable. The degree of violence that can be brought to bear is now exponentially greater, to the extent that it, instead of enhancing the replication, could undermine the replication. It could become self-terminating.
And even ideas that, for example, now there is this new trend about living in the moment, living in the now. You have to be in the present moment, but it's actually constraining to, it gets conceptualized, and like now you thinking in, like it constrains you from thinking about the future or thinking about the past. That's not allowed. You have to be in present and now, here and now. So even pleasant ideas can be kind of like taken by the mind, conceptualized and constrained and made it into something rigid.
For sure, because every measurement, every comparison is relational and is always temporal. and is always ever changing. So at one moment in time, something can be creative. At another moment in time, it'll become destructive. Again, it's a question of time and degree. This is the paradox, the contradictoriness inherent in all movement. But the question is, what happens if there's movement, but no something that is moving?
I want to ask you a very practical question about, because I've noticed this among many who go to a lot of these non-dual meetings. They do conceptually understand that this is not something you can get, and there's no way to get there. But then they are waiting for something to happen. And that phase is kind of it can be quite frustrating. What would you say to someone who is like waiting for this to open up?
Well, in a sense, every character is waiting. It doesn't matter the context or the story they tell themselves. Again, that sense of something missing and waiting for that missing link to appear, as it were, is inherent in the design of the physiology to maintain movement. There is no answer to movement because there's no inherent problem with movement. The only problem is the prediction that there is a center, a something which is a mover. And there is no answer for the mover. There is no solution for the mover because there never was a separate something called a mover ever born. So again, the question is, what happens if there's movement and yet no mover? It's just this. It's just what's always appeared. This crazy stillness, dancing and tumbling, creating and destroying, appearing as a male and a female, a child and an elderly person, an us and a them, a black and a white, time and space, futures and pasts. But there never was a something ever born that was a me and a you, a female and a male, an us and a them, a future and a past, a creation and a destruction. All these are just knowledge comparisons, which are just good enough for utility to enable the organism to survive. But it's never a knowledge of a something. Nothing has ever been born.
You have talked about your Kundalini experiences in some of your conversations, Paul, but some non-dual speakers, they are dismissive about Kundalini. How do you reconcile that?
I don't know the context in which you're saying, but there is no need. A Kundalini experience is drinking a cup of tea. So there's no need to be dismissive of drinking a cup of tea or accepting of drinking a cup of tea. Both movements are not what they appear to be. Again, there is no something that is Kundalini. There's just ocean appearing as a cup of tea movement or a Kundalini movement. There can be all, freedom can appear in any blinking way at once, as it were. And I'm, of all the, over, I don't know, 40 years of chatting to folks, each physiology, in a sense, has its own story of how it got wet, how it fell into the ocean, as it were. Careful of my words, because they're drunk. So there's no rules to freedom. There's a little hint in the word unconditional. Freedom is unconditional, otherwise it wouldn't be freedom. And unconditional suggests that there are no conditions necessary for this to be the case. Because, again, paradoxically, this is already the case. This is already freedom. Drinking a cup of tea, Kundalini, playing football, building sandcastles, building quantum computers, building space rockets. It was just the ocean appearing as one object called the subject and another object called the universe. It's not two, it's one song, it's the universe. It's one song. It's silence singing. It's freedom song. It's this conversation. It's sitting in a chair. It's walking down a street. It's laughter and it's suffering, it's illness. It's everything. And yet utterly absent of a something. That's too simple to put into words. So there is no such thing as non-duality. So there's no thing that can be communicated. There's no something that can be written in a book. There's no something that can be transmitted. Non-duality is drinking a cup of tea.
I'm going to ask this question. It's a drunken question. So, and I'm taking the risk of creating more concepts here, but please bear with me. So this seeing, it's definitely, some people have called it as liberation, some have called it ultimate freedom, and it is a freedom from a lot of concepts. it is a psychological freedom. But if someone is really sick and their physiology is in pain, they're not going to be free from that pain. Like this is, even if this scene happens, it may be a psychological freedom, but the physical body could still be in the pain. And I'm referring to some traditional, older, non-dual teachers. They say that that awakening is incomplete until even your physical body is free of everything. It's a concept, but I'd love to know what you have to say about that. What?
The possibility is that there's no separate something which is a body. There's no separate something that can be free of a body. There is no separate something which is a body. So there's no something to be free of, and there's no something to be free of something else. Again, these are just knowledge comparisons, utility comparisons that are designed for something, designed for movement. And what we are drunkenly, crazily speaking about you could say is a stillness that moves. Like every story, the story of the body is held together. You could say with like a gravitational energy that creates the fake news that there is a center, the energetic sense. But it's very obvious that there is just this luminosity which is appearing as a cup, as a tree, as a body. And the paradox again of those edges, called a cup, a tree, a body, is that the edges are edgeless. So what we term on knowledge as the body is just like everything else is an edgeless edge. The body, careful of my words, a cup of tea or the body is everything. It's difficult, it's impossible to, you can push the mind towards this, but it just melts. And the words and the comparisons are no longer needed because there are not two things. So the words can keep going for a while, the comparisons, the knowledge, and then slowly they melt and just the self-obvious luminosity of what is. It becomes obvious that there's no separate something which is a tree, which is a cup, which is a body, and that which we call a cup, a tree, a body is literally everything, which is not a something. Impossible. This is impossible. Impossible. Because again, this is a spade. It's designed for movement, for utility purposes. Yet freedom, this ocean, has no utility. Because it's not on a journey somewhere from an A to a B. It's just this. It's always been just this. And it's known. Not in the way we normally use that word. But again, over 40 years, every single character I've met, it's like there's no conceptual noises come out of the body with this luminosity, this self-luminosity. Just noises tend to come out of the body, like tears or crying or swearing. That it's like the remembering of something which is never forgotten. Blinking heck, it's always just been this. It's just been the appearance of this journeyless journey. These paradoxical phrases that language creates. This gateless gate. Silence singing and stillness moving.